Je m'appelle Tim Heifer. C'est un grand plaisir d'être présent ici avec Ben Smith, le PDG de Air France-KLM. Ce panel, cette discussion aura lieu en anglais, même si Monsieur Smith est très à l'aise en français, on va le faire en anglais. Il y a de la traduction simultanée si vous le souhaitez. So, it's my great pleasure to present our guest today. Ben Smith was born in the UK, but grew up and lived in Canada, where he started out as a ticket agent at Air Ontario, I believe. And Ben has been an aviation enthusiast since his childhood, collecting airline timetables, which is a passion that we've discovered just now that we had in common, which means that we're both aviation geeks. And Ben is certainly not ashamed to call himself a geek, as someone who really knows aviation from childhood. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people in the room here today, including a few secret av geeks in the media, like myself. And Ben went into the aviation business after starting his own travel business and meeting his mentor, his future mentor, Robert Milton, and joining Air Canada, where he had a rapid ascent to become the airline's number 2, definitely credited with that airline's turnaround, including through some long-term deals with pilots, which perhaps we could come back to. And to the surprise of many people, perhaps even including himself, Ben was approached to run Air France-KLM last year after a turbulent period for the company, but he's very quickly established himself and has fascinating challenges ahead as the leader of 84,000 staff serving 100 million passengers a year. So, Ben, let's just go back to that phone call a year or so ago. How was it that you came to end up at Air France-KLM?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me here today. Great pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to do this in English. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more clear with my answers. So last July, I received a phone call, unexpected, from a search firm who left a message on my phone at the end of June, early July. And normally I get phone calls on my portable that could be asking for a recommendation on a job that could be available, or could be asking me if I'd be interested in a job that would never be something I'd be interested in. So it's never been a successful way for people to approach me. But this was something that came about with the first statement from the individual when I called them back was, "Are you interested in the opening at Air France-KLM?" And for a job like that, it was not something that I would have thought I would have received on my mobile phone. So at first I thought it was not serious, and then quickly realized that it was serious. And the lady I was speaking with said, "Listen, it's something that we would like to fill relatively quickly. Can you come to Europe, now?" And I was able to do it in about 10 days, and had a very good rapport right off the top with the nominating committee at Air France-KLM, and we came very close to a deal at the end of July. Still some things I had to work out. And then what was new to me, here in Europe, was how much interest there was in our sector, in particular Air France-KLM. So on August 8th, there was a leak that I was interested in this role, and I had not yet spoken to my colleagues in my previous position, so it put me into a little bit of a difficult spot. So we quickly resolved the outstanding issues with Air France-KLM, and I accepted on the 16th of August and then started a month later.
So here's a company where the previous CEO has been kicked out by the staff, and a senior executive has had his shirt torn off his back on television. I'm sure you must have seen those pictures. That must have given you pause for thought. Did you think, why am I doing this?
Well, as you mentioned, I've followed airlines my entire life, and KLM being 100 years old this year, Air France turning 85 last year, obviously very well respected airlines, by everybody who follows the business. So this was something definitely that I wanted to be a part of, knowing the potential of how these airlines could stand globally higher than where they are today. So to me, that was a very exciting opportunity and challenge. I'd say the difficulties, challenges that were taking place in the group, particularly at Air France, were somewhat of concern to me. My colleagues and friends, thought it was crazy that I would even consider taking on this role. But I like challenges. I knew the potential. I thought I knew the potential of this group. So it was a relatively straightforward, easy decision for me to make.
So you arrived here in September, I think. At that time, you found a company that was still pretty much in turmoil. There was the tensions, labor tensions were pretty high, at least on the French side. There were governance issues. So there was a lot to cope with. How did you set about getting to grips with the challenges you face here?
Well, first, I arrived, as I said, in September, and we were in the middle of a social crisis, labor crisis, and every day we had a strike threat, or a préavis, as it's called here. So we had to, I came here with a couple of other colleagues from Canada, had to quickly understand, what the major issues were. So a lot of listening the first 2 or 3 weeks that we were here. But what was, to my pleasant surprise, was the enormous amount of pride that is within Air France and KLM, both airlines. Most airlines around the world, the employees, because it's such a passionate business, do have a high level of engagement and pride. But here in particular, in France at Air France, it was something I'd never seen before. And because of that level of pride, because of the level of professionalism that is, many of you who may fly Air France see that it's a very professional airline. With the level of experience, this is an amazing foundation to work from. So I found once I had a high level understanding of what the issues were and really focused on those three, pride, experience, and professionalism, and then tried to direct all negotiations and discussions around 4 big pillars, which were trust. There wasn't much trust in Air France. Respect, very little respect within the company. Transparency, this was really important. And then last one being confidentiality. And I know we're in a La Tribune event here, but many of the items that were taking place, the discussions taking place within the company, were sometimes written about in the media ahead of what was going on inside. So we really pushed for confidentiality, and I believe that helped us come to some improved discussions and eventually some success with the negotiations that we were having.
Right. Well, media colleagues in the room, you have been warned, and that's very clear. So you have Air France-KLM, as you said, 2 really very sort of iconic brands, but going through a difficult time. So you've said that you want to restore this group to its place as the leading airline in Europe. What do you mean by that?
So right now, if you look in Europe, there are 5 major airline groups, 3 what you call legacy groups, so ourselves, Air France-KLM, the Lufthansa group, which is made up of Lufthansa, Swiss, Austrian, Brussels Airlines, and Eurowings. And then you have IAG, which is British Airways, Iberia, Aer Lingus, Vueling, and Level. Then you have the 2 low-cost carriers, EasyJet and Ryanair, which have been very, very successful. So there's various ways to measure success. I mean, there's all the key financial metrics, which we are not at the top of those lists. So there's an enormous amount of improvement where we can do there. Customer satisfaction, we're not at the top of the list there. But I would say number 1, which I'm very happy to say, and I see a lot of my colleagues in the room here, is employee engagement and employee alignment with our various brands. And for me, that would be the most important. It is the most important goal of mine for us to exceed all other airlines in Europe on that front. And when you have that in a customer service business with the kind of brands that we have and all the assets, this market here in Paris, which is unbelievable, it's the largest tourism market in the world, and with the facility, the transit facility we have at Schiphol in Amsterdam, these are 2 powerful assets that our competitors do not have.
when you talk about being top of the tree, certainly in financial terms, now IAG and Lufthansa are such a distance ahead, at least in some of those measures, market cap and so forth. Do you see it as an aspirational target, or is this really a realistic goal, and over what time period?
Yes, I believe it's definitely achievable. 5 years is the timeline we've given ourselves. We still have a few negotiations that need to take place to ensure that we have the full base and foundation to be able to achieve that ambition. We have negotiations going on right now with the Air France pilots surrounding the lifting of a cap on our Transavia France unit, which right now is capped at 40 airplanes. That tool is needed within our group, and we have to work around a limit on slots that we have in place at Amsterdam, and how best we work within that limitation. So these two items here, I think once we get a better footing on those, we'll really set the stage for which way we're going to move forward.
You mentioned those Transavia talks. How are those talks going?
Confidential. No, they're going well.
You tell me off the record?
Yes, no, they're going well. I think it's clear that our pilots and everyone at Air France wants the same thing, which is for us to succeed. And having a more trustful, respectful way of discussing is, I'm very happy to see that it's moving along rapidly.
And do you envisage that setting a new ceiling, or just not having a ceiling at all?
Look, I think it's the flexibility that we'd like our group to have in all segments of the business, and that the focus within our group, within our three major brands, really shifts toward outside of the group. We have a lot of inner competition going on, a lot of inner difficulties, and I would say inability to work in a way that we should, because there's a little bit too much focus inward as opposed to outward. So this is with any large group, this is something that you've probably seen a lot of noise over the last few months around issues within our group. A lot of progress has been made on the managerial governance of the company, of the group, and this will enable us to shift a lot of that focus from within the group to outside.
You mentioned some of those governance issues. Of course, there were some negative press reports in the Netherlands at the time. There was quite a lot of speculation about the relationship between the two airlines, and also between yourself and Peter Elbers. Do you feel that things have really settled down and improved now, or is it still a sort of lingering mistrust there?
No, I think it's significantly better. Look, the airline, like Air France bought KLM in 2003, 2004. In the beginning, the obvious synergies were put in place, ensuring that joint sales, joint revenue management were fully exploited, and there was enormous benefit to both carriers. Then some of the more difficult, merger items or purchase items, within the rest of the group were pushed off, and were now trying to be resolved. So in that period, maintenance, cargo, IT were put together, and synergies were there. But from a managerial governance perspective, we didn't have the kind of alignment from a strategic perspective and from a day-to-day management perspective. So this is what we pushed forward. This is what I insisted on having in February. And because of the new corporate governance put in place, where we had a non-executive chair position created, the position at the head of the group was no longer specifically attached to Air France. So I have no special attachment to Air France that's different to KLM. So we're now running this group as a normal group with 3 separate brands. There's a head of each brand, and it's all part of one group. And this had to be clarified within a management governance structure. Once that was done and that clarity was put in place back in February, the functioning of the group is much, much better.
So in management terms, you feel that, or in terms of focus, the group is as Dutch as it is French now?
Yeah, most definitely. Very different,
right,
which is good, but I'm quickly learning that the Netherlands is not France, and France is not the Netherlands.
Right. So very diplomatic answer.
So they're very interesting, but they're not the same.
Right. Of course, one of the outcomes of that whole episode was that the Dutch government, very surprisingly to most people, I think, quickly bought a 14% stake to match the French stake. And what we have seen with some companies in Europe with cross-border control is that you get two blocks of government shareholdings. They're sort of like tanks parked on the lawn, pointing at each other, so that it becomes a force of paralysis rather than growth or movement. Do you see a danger of that here?
Well, what I see is, Air France was wholly owned by the French government and then was gradually, privatized to the point, we're now at, 14% owned by the French government. And what is positive about this relationship and this ownership is, for the most part, we're 100% aligned. France needs and wants a strong airline based here to support Paris and France as a country. So in terms of that, we're aligned, and maybe perhaps later in the conversation we could talk about the areas where we're not aligned. And the same thing on the Netherlands. And because transportation and aviation is so key in all jurisdictions, not just here in France, not just in the Netherlands, but all major countries around the world, it's only natural that the focus and I'd say the support that an airline can provide a country remains intact. So you look at Amsterdam. Amsterdam is, is the main city in a country of 17 million people, but KLM supports, and we have nonstop links to so many cities that would not be supported without the hub structure that we have at Amsterdam. So the investment in that hub structure, all the benefits that that hub structure provides Amsterdam and the Netherlands, is extremely important to the Dutch government, extremely important to the Dutch economy. And if that is ever put into question, it's only natural that the government may take an interest or a stake. So from my perspective, so long as that's the interest, that that type of commitment or that type of focus is maintained, it's not an issue for us, because the value of Schiphol, the value of KLM is so clear to the group. It's only something we want to invest in, and only something that we want to enhance. So there's no misalignment there.
Schiphol has, though, I think, pretty much reached its capacity. And how are you going to secure KLM's growth, given the importance of that hub that you just mentioned?
It's extremely important for us to really understand the approach to capacity in the Amsterdam area. There is a new airport, Lelystad, which potentially could offer small relief to Amsterdam's saturation. We can't upgauge the aircraft that we have. That's also a possibility. We could do something that would not be of interest. We could reduce the number of connection traffic flows that we have there to be able to grow our origin-destination traffic base in Amsterdam. But no, it's a concern that we do have a limitation at Schiphol.
What about you just mentioned connectivity. That's a very interesting point. One of the problems for a company like yours is the very sharp growth of low-cost airlines and their ability to self-connect through these hubs. Sort of hubs will sort of dissolve. They'll be there, or they'll pass under somebody else's effective control in a way. How are you going to tackle that?
Look, I think let's say here in Paris, we have 2 airports that we operate out of. So we have a very large point-to-point network from Orly that serves our customers to the key destinations, predominantly in France and some of the French territories. And this is, for the most part, point-to-point traffic, and it works well for us. We have a few unique cost issues in operating in the domestic market out of Orly, but in terms of the traffic demand and the traffic flow and the types of aircrafts that we offer, or we utilize on those routes, we have an operation that is point-to-point. Out of Roissy, we have a combination. We have a very, very large point-to-point, sector of our business, and then we have the rest of it is on a connection basis. So in Paris, we're very lucky because the home market is so big. We can choose, what type of traffic we want to carry, and not every market has that. You look at some of our competitors in the Gulf, like Dubai, where the The market is very, very small relative to the size of their airline. They don't have that luxury. So as more point-to-point flights could perhaps come into competition with a carrier like that, it's a different problem than what we have. We are in, from a market perspective and from a choice of opportunity perspective, Paris is a great place to be.
Does this whole experience suggest to you perhaps that in Europe it's especially hard to do airline mergers because it's a market perhaps roughly the same size as North America? I'm not sure if that's exactly the case, but anyway, very, very large market, but crisscrossed with national boundaries, and because of 70-year-old, ICAO practices, each country has to have its own aviation identity, if only for bilaterals and so forth. So you can really only do sort of back office mergers in Europe. You can't have full mergers. Is that something that will always cause a sort of penalty on the growth that you can achieve?
I don't believe so. Like if you look at our group, we are one group. We have 3 very strong brands, and the brand Air France here in France has enormous value, and I don't think there's there would be any reason to dilute that brand or stop investing in it. Same thing in KLM. In the Netherlands, the KLM brand is equally as valuable. So in merging the 2 companies from a brand perspective, no value. Whereas in the United States, there are no flag carriers. So when Delta merged with Northwest, or Continental with United, or American with US Airways, and full consolidation, and also full consolidation of the brands, the reason for doing that here is not the same, and really would add no value, would actually probably pull value. So from a back office perspective, there's no reason why we can't get the full suite of benefits that our competitors in the US have achieved. But from a brand perspective, I think it's even better because we can build off of the strong association and I'd say loyalty of each one of our markets and how they feel toward their flag carrier brand, and something that we don't see in the US. But you do see it in a lot of other countries. You do see that in Australia, you see it in Singapore, where there's a very, very strong affiliation with all stakeholders within the country and their airline.
One of the handicaps you face is the very different regulatory, legal, sort of tax environment between your 2 host nations, if I could call them that. Are you ever going to be able to catch up with IAG and Lufthansa with, let's not even talk about labor costs, but the whole tax structure being so different in France and the regulatory environment? Is that a worry? Does that keep you awake at night?
For sure. It's a huge concern for the group, less so in the Netherlands than here in France. We have an infrastructure cost and taxes and charges that are the highest in Europe. As an example, just within our group, if we took the entire Air France operation, as it stands today, and moved it to our other major airport in the group in Amsterdam Schiphol. So we took all of our activity from Roissy and moved it all to Schiphol. We would save between 800 million euros and €1 billion, just from an infrastructure perspective. That's the penalty that we're under operating here. So that's the cost of doing business at Aéroport de Paris. That's the special taxes that we have imposed on the industry here. It's the social charges that we pay on all of our employees. It is a very, very difficult place to do business in the world from a comparison perspective. So for the local market, some people say, well, any airline flying into Paris is subject to that. Yes, on their departures out of Paris, but we have over 90% of our employees that work for Air France based in France. So even though we're flying all over the world, over 90% are based here. So we are subject as a company to pay all of the social charges that are our responsibility on a group of employees that are not necessarily working full-time in France. And then the other big disadvantage for us is from a hub perspective. If, say, a customer in, let's say Seattle, who's going, over Paris to Bangalore, if they choose to fly with Air France as opposed to, let's say, Lufthansa over Frankfurt, we are disadvantaged because to be cost competitive, we have to then discount or lose out on any potential profit because of the physical location and the industry costs that we face here in France. So it is a huge, huge concern, and it does worry all of us at Air France. And if we would like this airline, which we all do, to be globally competitive, it's something that must be addressed.
I'm going to keep talking, but I'd like to know if there are any questions in the room. We have some microphones here, or perhaps you could just stand up.
Very shy group.
What are the other main... Oh, sorry, over here. While we're waiting for that, we talked about the union talks. It's quite remarkable that there has been a union agreement already since you arrived. Could you imagine, I think in Air Canada you negotiated a 10-year union agreement, which gives a lot of visibility. Is that your ultimate objective here?
Well, what we did in Canada was for different reasons in a different environment. Air Canada, my previous employer, we were in an extremely difficult position, and there was hesitation on the part of our shareholders to invest in a future plan with the risk of any instability within the company. So we had a lot of discussions with not just our pilots, but with our cabin crew and our maintenance personnel as well, that to really build a strong future, we had to ensure that stability was in place at the airline to attract the necessary investments. And we got buy-in from all of our key stakeholders. And part of that buy-in came in the form of a 10-year commitment to be aligned with the company and the company's views. And we were able to almost double the size of the business, and the value of the company went from about 300 million Canadian to today it's 10 billion Canadian. So it was a great turnaround story. Here at Air France, is it realistic to have 10-year deals? Probably not. But can we get full alignment between our stakeholders, same ones, cabin crew, pilots, management is very, very key here, and all the other stakeholders within Air France, and a future business plan? I think so. It's a must. In what format? We're working on that. But to carbon copy what I've done in the previous role, I don't think is realistic here.
Okay. I'm going to take a couple of questions. Rob Wall.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Tim. Robert Wall with the Wall Street Journal. I'm just curious about your view on low-cost long haul. Obviously, June was neither low-cost nor particularly effective, and you've put it out. It's been put out of its misery. I'm just wondering what you think. Does that mean low-cost long haul is just not something that works for your group, or is it something you could revisit in a more intelligent way down the road?
So maybe I'll just mention a couple things on June. June was designed and put in place on a reasonable business plan, I would say. But the execution, there was a big error in the execution, and that was the break in trust between our management and our cabin crew in the way it was explained and the way it was introduced. And after that break in trust with our cabin crew, then there was a break in trust also with our customers who did not understand the product, did not meet their expectations. And then, of course, when we actually looked at the financials of how it was actually playing out, it was not meeting the expectations of what the business plan had. So it was very, very quickly evident to me that there was no value in this brand, and there's no point in waiting. So quickly made the decision to end that experience after 1 year, of service. Low-cost long haul, that model has yet to be proven. I don't see an example anywhere in the world where we believe it's a success. We can price very competitively because we have very large airplanes, where and when necessary, at least on a marginal variable basis. So to date, it's not something that really interests us. We follow it. We don't want to be in a position where we're not ready to compete. But to date, we've seen some failures on the transatlantic. We see Norwegian having financial difficulties. So it's from my perspective, it's a model that has not been proven.
Ben, what's your vision for Transavia, quite apart from the fleet, cap on the fleet? So you have AOCs in France and the Netherlands. Do you see the possibility of setting up bases elsewhere?
I think Transavia is quite old in the Netherlands, and then it was bought by our group, by KLM, about 30 years ago. And predominantly, it carries point of sale, Netherlands traffic to leisure destinations. Whereas here in France, the Transavia model is based at Orly and has 2 smaller bases within France, and is carrying a lot of point-to-point traffic with sales at either end. Right now, what we're looking for is full flexibility to do whatever is necessary to meet the market demand in all the segments and sectors that we fly. So I think it's very evident, for Transavia France, we'd like to use this tool to compete in areas where our Air France model, Air France brand, and segment pricing is not competitive. So it's quite clear that we have lost the France to Europe market in all the key French cities. So, Toulouse, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, Lille, even Lyon. So these are great opportunities for us where we have very loyal customers that right now we're not participating in any France-Europe segments or flights. So this is a great opportunity for Transavia. Would we do something outside of France? I would say this would have to be agreed to and have to be aligned with our staff. It's not top of our list, but definitely we want to ensure that we have a better, bigger market share and presence within France, and we're able to carry as many of our loyal customers on all their travel needs as opposed to the ones that we're only operating today.
What's your strategy for dealing with the Gulf airlines? Their threat is very well understood. There have been a lot of complaints in the past about the European and American view that they are subsidized, something that they deny. Do you think that you can win that argument politically through arguments about protectionism and so forth? Or do you need to actually have an operational business strategy for dealing with them, assuming that those financing conditions will stay?
Well, so the Gulf carriers are the number one threat that we have, for Air France-KLM. We're not really competing against airlines, we're competing against, governments. And these governments have policies that fully support their airlines, which is their choice. We're not going to change, a decision or policies that come out of other countries. But, their expectation and what they believe is they're entitled to is full access to our markets in the Netherlands and France in return for access to markets that are really not interesting. So we view that the trade deal is not balanced. So for us to have, access to, to Qatar or to Dubai or Abu Dhabi is not that exciting. But to have full access to France or the Netherlands for these airlines is really, really big. The fact that, when we look at Dubai, that, the head of Dubai is also the head of the airport and is also head of the airline, there is full alignment there. And there's extreme support to ensure that the Emirates has used a tool to link Dubai and create a globally competitive city. So for us, it's, I don't think the government here in France, fully understands what we're missing out in terms of opportunity from a country perspective and how much value a strong, airline industry is in France. It doesn't have to be just for Air France, it's any airline that's based here. Jobs are created here, decisions are made here. The future strategy of what aviation will look like should be made here. So I think it's in everyone's interest who has, is a stakeholder within France. This is important. And if you look at other jurisdictions around the world, Singapore is an example where, it's very clear how important airlines are to cities or to countries. It's just as equally important here in France and in the Netherlands.
So presumably you're not very keen on this open skies agreement that the European Commission has signed with Qatar. I believe is also negotiating with the UAE.
So I would say it's a step At least it provides a legal framework to use if it can be proven that there are illegal subsidies or things that have not been agreed to. So a framework was agreed to, and it's interesting that the UAE is unwilling to sign an equal or a similar type agreement. So I'd say it's a very small first step.
What about consolidation? We've seen a lot of airlines go bust or be bought. Air France-KLM has itself, of course, kicked off, really, the European consolidation and then has continued to play a role in it. What role do you see now for the group? Is it a buyer? Is it a seller? What's your role?
The number one priority for us is to ensure that both airlines, in particular Air France, are performing at the level in which they should. This is priority number one. We have recently purchased a stake in Virgin Atlantic, which strategically for our joint venture across the Atlantic with Delta made sense to ensure we had a strong position at London Heathrow. But I would say our number one priority today is to ensure that our group, with its core brands, are working and performing at the level in which they must and they can.
What about the environment? The industry's got a big plan on reducing emissions, but it's not enough for a growing group of protesters, especially in Sweden, where they're very vocal. And we see that spreading to other countries now, the flight shaming movement. Is the airline industry, is your company and the industry doing enough to address that?
I believe we're doing as much as we can. I think what we're not doing is messaging out how much we are doing. First of all, Air France-KLM were the only group that made the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We're the only ones. We've reduced our net emissions since 2005 by 7%, and the industry is committed to reducing our emissions by 50% by 2050. So there are an enormous amount of work is being done to ensure that we are responsible companies, airlines, within this extremely important effort that must improve. But as I say, the efforts that are already taken place, I don't think are well recognized. Also, this this idea of taxing the industry and not putting those tax dollars back into ways to improve the efficiency and improve airplanes' ability to reduce emissions, I think does not make any sense. We are, the ability for us to buy new airplanes that that emit less carbon, is not going to be helped by making it more expensive for us to operate.
I asked this in an earlier panel, but I'm curious to know your view. Your colleague Carsten Spohr at Lufthansa at IATA, the closing press conference, raised some concerns about what he considers to be sort of ultra-low pricing. He didn't name the large low-cost carrier he had in mind, but I think we can all imagine who he had in mind. His argument was that cutting prices so low stimulates traffic and therefore emissions and is ultimately bad for the environment. In other words, that very low plane ticket prices cause pollution. Do you agree with that?
I didn't know he said that. Thank you for sharing.
I hope I'm summarizing what he said fairly, but I think that was his argument, that there are low prices, but there's also a very special category of unreasonably low prices which just fuel traffic and make the problem worse.
I would probably approach that slightly differently. People fly for all kinds of reasons. People fly for their own vacation reasons. They fly to go visit friends and family. They'll fly for business reasons, and they'll make their decisions based on price, based on airline schedules, based on loyalty to a company. So are airlines doing something that is worse because of a certain price versus another price? I think it's a ticket on an airplane for whatever reason should be treated from what you just described relatively the same. If somebody needs to make a business trip, how is that any different than the decision to make a personal trip? It's all relative. Somebody can afford, a 50 € ticket, or someone can afford a 5,000 € ticket. May not be the same people, but they're still flying. So I don't know if I would approach it, quite like that. But the responsibility of us as an airline for whatever ticket price that we've got on a specific sale, it's the same. That's how we look at it. As I said, we have on most of our flights hundreds of different prices, but we look at each seat and our responsibility to the environment the same for each one of them.
What about this broader point, though, that, Corsair has been discussed for years, but in a way, is it possible that it solves yesterday's problem? It addresses the current and recent political climate, but in 10 years' time, it will no longer be politically acceptable. You're going to have to do more, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we are renewing our fleet at a rate that I think is unprecedented. You look at the technology that is in place today, and I think many of you who follow the industry, it's quite amazing, the improvements. So, you know how much a new airplane is, a 787 versus some of the technology that it's been replacing. This should not be taken lightly. The emissions per customer or per seat on all of our flights, be it a 1-hour flight or a 15-hour flight, if you look at the per seat emissions, it's gone down considerably. Is it enough? No. Do we want to do more? Yes. Here in domestic France, our ability to participate in this market has been severely curtailed because of the TGV. Is that a suitable alternative? It is, when it is something that, one of our shareholders, the French government, is also, the major investor or the only investor in SNCF. This is one way of potentially dealing with short haul travel. You saw that some people have messaged out that there should be a limit on flights where there is a train option. Like this is something that we think about, we're concerned about. Should we do something in partnership with the SNCF? To be studied, to be determined. But our short haul, these discussions around the environment are happening at a pace that we were not expecting. It's been very, very fast. So it is something that the industry's got to speed up and move a little faster than perhaps we were doing last year.
Thank you. I just want to see if there's just maybe one. I'm conscious that I think we're pretty much out of time, but are there any questions d'autres? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans la salle, en français ou en anglais?
I have a question about the cabin plans at Air France. A few years ago, the 777 started to be retrofitted with the best ambience cabins. Now the A330s are being retrofitted with a new cabin plan. We know that the A350, which is coming, will be with the June cabin plan, and the A380s will need to be retrofitted with maybe a new one. So what's the strategy behind this, and are we going to see maybe one day a uniform fleet and uniform cabin plan at Air France?
What's your cabin strategy?
Okay, so this may be a long answer because we have a very complex fleet at Air France. So the A380s, we have 10 at Air France. 3, we made a decision to have them exit the fleet because 5 of our aircraft are leased. The other 7 do have, as you just mentioned, older seats. They're up to 10 years old that are not necessarily industry competitive. So we are in the middle of making a decision on how long the A380s are going to stay in the fleet and whether we should invest 30 to 40 million euros per aircraft in upgrading those seats to industry competitive. Right now, in the aircraft that we have already renovated, so our 25 777-200s, they don't have a first class product, but the business class cabin is industry competitive. We've done the same thing on 19 of our 777-300ERs with the same business class seat. So those 2 airplane types were already there. But we do have a La Première cabin on 19 of those 777-300ERs. So those are best in class. I don't know, I'm very happy to say that we were rated best La Première, or best first class product in the world a couple of weeks ago. So it's great for Air France. Thank you to all my colleagues in the audience here. So on that part of the fleet, we are uniform. We do have another 24 777-300ERs that are in an older configuration. Those are being converted. So the entire 777 fleet will have a uniform standard if they have La Première, but all the way down to our economy cabin. So that right now, those are the bulk of our long-haul airplanes. So the A380s, if we do decide to renovate them, will be renovated into a similar type of product. The A350 fleet that was initially planned to go to June does have a slightly different business class seat coming on the aircraft. It is still fully lie flat. It is direct aisle access. So this, even though it's not exactly the same seat, it's relatively similar. So as far as we're concerned, we can swap those aircraft types between on the same route, and it should not be too different for customers, and it should still meet their expectations. The A330 fleet, which we currently have predominantly on Africa, here, my predecessors made a decision to put full flat seats on there, but not in a direct aisle access configuration. So that is slightly different, but we will isolate that product over time to our African destinations, which are shorter than the rest of our long-haul destinations. 787s, which we have in the fleet, identical business class seat to the 777s. So in a roundabout way, with our long list of aircraft types, we're getting there. We do want full alignment, but it will take some time.
I think if you ever wanted an example of a CEO who really knows his business in enormous detail, his product in detail, that was it. It's been a great pleasure. I think perhaps we've got time for one more question. One here, thank you.
Bonjour, Joël Rosenberg. J'ai posé une question un peu analogue à M. Faury tout à l'heure sur la gouvernance. On a eu un exemple récemment, là, il y a quelques jours, excusez-moi de parler en français, mais je suis plus clair en français. On a eu un exemple, il y a quelques jours, avec Fiat et Renault, et disons une sorte de dissonance entre le management et l'actionnaire étatique, et une incapacité à prendre des décisions. Vous venez heureusement du continent nord-américain. Comment allez-vous éduquer vos deux actionnaires étatiques, français et néerlandais, si un jour vous devez faire une alliance ou une acquisition et il faudra aller vite? Comment jugez-vous votre gouvernance avec votre expérience nord-américaine?
So, how to enlighten your shareholders on
J'ai compris pratiquement tout, j'ai pas entendu la deuxième partie de votre question.
Pardon, moi j'ai pas entendu très bien.
Ah, excusez-moi,
Oui.
la deuxième partie de la question...
On n'entend pas très bien ici.
Pardon.
Oui. Allez-y, monsieur.
Je vais parler très fort. Comment allez-vous, comment pouvez-vous, avec votre expérience nord-américaine, tenter d'éduquer nos gouvernements au fait d'être un actionnaire responsable, c'est-à-dire de laisser le management manager et avoir un recul sur la gouvernance. Okay. Avec l'expérience, je dirais, qui s'est passé aujourd'hui, enfin ces 2 ou 3 derniers jours sur Renault.
So, I can't speak to the other discussions that are going on at some other companies in different industries, but I can say here in at Air France-KLM with our two main shareholders, two biggest shareholders, which are the French government and the Dutch government, the alignment is already there. It's not, yes, we are providing as much input as we can to ensure that the interests of these two shareholders do not come into conflict with how we want to run the business. But what I'm happy to say is the two main bodies of each government, so the Minister of the Economy in both countries, fully understand that the best way for Air France-KLM to succeed, we cannot have interference by either country, either state. So I think I'm optimistic that is not going to be something that I have to spend too much time on.
So no interference, that's very clear. I'm going to just wrap up very quickly. Thank you very much, Ben, for taking the time to speak to us. It's enormously wide-ranging. You obviously know every single corner, every detail of the business, and have won over a lot of people in a very short time. I'm just going to ask you 3 AvGeek questions. Favorite aircraft, current or past passenger aircraft?
Very easy for me. No, my favorite aircraft of all time is the original 747, so the 100 series.
Favorite route?
Favorite route would have to be New York, JFK to London Heathrow. It is the largest international air route in the world.
And which airline, if you weren't running Air France-KLM or Air Canada, which airline in the history of the aviation industry would you like to run?
Very clear for me, and that's Pan American World Airways.
Thank you very much. Ben Smith, thank you.